Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Father.
Catholic atheist. What does that even mean? We've been looking at some of the ways we profess a belief in God, but then, through our attitudes and actions, act like he doesn't exist. Lately, our lives have been turned upside down. How have we responded? As people of faith? Or have we been tempted to act like Catholic atheists? We say we believe in God and then doubt that he loves us. Or how can we say we believe in a personal God, but then we don't talk to him in prayer? Or when we choose worry over prayer? Today we're looking at how many of us Catholics believe in God but don't really know him. By know, we don't mean know about him, but don't have a personal, intimate relationship. In any relationship, when one person doesn't know the other, one or both fail to really know and understand each other. The people involved often drift apart. We see it happen in marriages, in high school friendships. Parents and children often experience this as well. But it's saddest of all when we drift apart from God or really never knew him in the first place. Some Catholics don't know God in a personal way because they learned about God like a subject in school and not know him intimately. You may know theological facts about God, but you don't know his heart and what he's about. Some Catholics might not know God because when we grew up, it was all about butterflies and kumbaya and God is love. And that seemed to be the content of every single Sunday experience. So you figured there was nothing more. Or you learned the Catholic faith as a bunch of rules and laws to follow. You thought religion was just about following the rules. Kind of like God is way up here, and all of these laws and rules, and we're way down here. And so a personal relationship with God is impossible. In the Gospel of John today, we hear that the disciples see a beggar who had been blind from birth. The disciples asked Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? They loved to have someone to blame for everything. Jesus corrects the disciples and tells them, it's not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be made manifest in him. Jesus sees this as an opportunity to show the power of God. And in verse 6, we're told, as he said this, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and anointed the man's eyes with the clay, saying to him very specifically, go wash in the pool of Siloam. This is very personal. Like God creating humanity from dust from the ground. Jesus forms the clay and puts it on the man's eyes. He touches him physically, intimately. So the blind man does what Jesus says. He washes, and suddenly he can see. So that gets the attention of some of the people that knew him. They ask the obvious question, how were your eyes opened? Notice how the man born blind answers. He says, the man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed and received my sight. They then asked him where Jesus was, but the blind man didn't know. He had never seen Jesus. He had only heard his voice. Notice how the blind man calls Jesus a man. Just a guy, nothing special. We'll see how that changes. So they brought to the Pharisees the man who had been formerly blind. And the next verse tells us that it was a Sabbath. And the Pharisees taught you that no one would heal anyone on the Sabbath. So the formerly blind man told them Jesus put clay on his eyes. I washed, now I can see. And some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. Because they have this law, they refuse to acknowledge that Jesus is from God. Knowing the prophecy of Isaiah, some other Pharisees argue back and forth, saying, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? What do you say about him, since he has opened your eyes? And the formerly blind man said, he's a prophet. Notice the progression in his thinking. At first, Jesus was just a man. Now he's a prophet. He's grown to know Jesus a little better, just like the Samaritan woman at the well last week. The idea of Jesus as a prophet was not welcomed by most Pharisees, but they're faced with this huge miracle. So they call in the man's parents and ask him, is this your son who you say was born blind? How does he now see? The parents see this as an interrogation. John tells us that his parents feared the Jewish authorities because they had already agreed that if anyone should confess Jesus to be the Christ, to be the Messiah, they would be put out of the synagogue. The parents didn't want to be thrown out of the synagogue because that meant becoming an outcast not only in your religion, but in every area of life. So they acknowledged their son had been born blind, but told the Pharisees and other Jewish leaders to talk to him because he could speak for himself. So the Jewish leaders had already made up their minds about Jesus. We can be like that too. We can refuse to recognize God. We can be so much about our own agendas, our own plans, that we leave no room to recognize God and know what he is up to in the world around us. The Pharisees called the man who had been born blind and said to him, give God the praise. We know this man is a sinner. They're pressuring the man to renounce Jesus and call him a sinner because they've now decided that he can't possibly be from God. He must be a sinner. The blind man says, whether he's a sinner or not, I do not know. But what I do know is that I was once blind, and now I see. So the Pharisees, not getting the man to renounce Jesus, ask again, how did he open your eyes? And the formerly blind man answered, I already told you, and you wouldn't listen. Why do you want me to tell you again? Then he says something accidentally which completely ticks off the Pharisees. He says, do you want to become his disciples too? So this question reveals that the blind man has decided, I am a disciple of Jesus. I don't know who he is, but if he can open my eyes, I am his disciple. And despite this amazing miracle, despite the fact he has healed people and his teachings resonate with people, we don't know where he is from and don't care to get to know him anymore. We choose to be blind and not really know Jesus. Their willful desire to not know Jesus is amazing. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but if anyone is a true worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a man born blind. The man born blind is amazed by the Pharisees' own willful ignorance. The Pharisees, though, don't want to listen to any reason. So they say, "You were born in utter sin, and would you teach us?" And they cast him out. So Jesus heard about this, and he found him and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" So the man says, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" And Jesus said, "You have seen him, and it is he who speaks to you." And the man said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped him. This story describes the Pharisees who choose a deepening ignorance of Jesus, contrasted with the blind man who moves more and more into the light of truth, who comes to know Jesus more and more as the Messiah and Son of God. Each of us is faced with the same choice. Do we choose a path of deepening ignorance of Jesus or a deepening understanding? And are we moving in one direction or the other? To move in the direction from blind ignorance to really knowing Jesus, here are some steps we need to take and some habits to apply. First, admit our own blindness, our own ignorance. The man born blind admitted what he didn't know. He admitted he didn't know how Jesus did what he did, and he admitted to Jesus he did not know who the Messiah was. He had never seen Jesus, and so he admitted that and then came to faith in Jesus and worshiped him. The Pharisees, on the other hand, knew Jesus less and less because they refused to acknowledge their ignorance. They refused to acknowledge that they couldn't explain the healing, that they might be wrong about Jesus. And the sad irony about the Pharisees is that they were the ones who were supposed to be on the lookout for the Messiah. To get to know God better, we must admit that we do not know him as well as we should. Secondly, the man born blind comes to know Jesus because he listens to him and does what he says. When Jesus tells him to go and wash his eyes in the pool, he does it. And it's from this obedience to Jesus that he comes to know him. The more we do as Jesus says, the more we come to know him. Because the man born blind, the more we do as Jesus says and follow him, the more we can see his power as the Messiah. Do as Jesus teaches, and you will experience healing. Do as Jesus teaches, and you will experience more of God's presence. And third, we need to make space for Jesus to come to us as the man born blind did. When he was thrown out of the synagogue and was all alone, Jesus came to him. The Pharisees, on the other hand, left no room for Jesus to be the Messiah. Jesus comes to us when we put aside the noise and the busyness and leave room for him to come to know us. And so in the upcoming days, leave some space for him to speak to you. Admit your blindness, listen to Jesus and obey. Make space for him to come to you.